For internal control, I can understand there needing to be 2 signatures on the check before it's delivered over to the payee. But the bank is not going to really pick up on that or stop that check as far as transferring liability to the bank for cashing it. The other problem is for electronic transfer of funds. Utilize, if you have 2 people in-house, and you want to use ETF, then what I would recommend is you have a split password, or you give the username to one person and the password to the other, or one username, and if you use a 10-digit, I use either 10 or 12-digit number. I'll have the first 6 numbers, and my wife or the business partner, whoever, will have the other 6 digits, so that we don't transfer without both of us being there and punching the button at the same time.
Yeah, and one other thing too, what I found out in probate issues and some other things, banks have different policies. And so what one bank may require, another bank may not require. Even though the law says they should, they'll say, well, we want you to do this anyway. It's an internal bank policy as much as the law.
One thing I would add to this is that I would say it'd be a very good idea to document whatever your procedures are. Have it in writing somewhere that it's been approved by the appropriate people within the church. Another option to the example you just mentioned, most electronic transfers that I'm familiar with are repetitive transactions. And if that's the case, one thing you might consider doing is have the church board, or if the pastor and treasurer have the authority, have them approve, the bookkeeper, have someone approve making that electronic transfer every month, so long as it does not exceed X amount of dollars or whatever. And you have approved the transaction, but you've got it documented in writing someplace that repetitive transaction can be done. That might be a possible alternative to solve that problem. Okay, let's move on quickly here. To audit or not to audit? Audits are expensive, as you know. An audit of a fairly good-sized church could wind up costing several $1,000s, and so it is the expensive thing to do. If you do decide to audit, my recommendation is that when you pick an auditing firm, you need to do exactly with the auditing firm what Dennis said earlier about your insurance company. Pick someone who knows churches. Okay? You've got a lot of great auditing firms out there that are great when it comes to accounting, don't know anything about churches and how they operate. You're going to be much better off if you find a firm who has got a great deal of experience in auditing churches. It'll make it much easier for them and for you, and probably will save you some money. As I mentioned, it can be expensive, but there's some alternatives that you can take if you don't want to do a full audit. First of all, you may not want to do a full audit every year. You might want to do one every 3 years or something like that. That helps hold down the expense. You also could you could put together an internal committee that does an internal audit review, if you will, like Van Deeken was talking earlier about safety issues around the church, liability issues. You have a committee that reviews that periodically. You can have a committee to do that. There are internal audit checklists that are available. If you'd like to, I wish I had brought a couple of examples with me, but I didn't. But if you'd like to see some examples of that, if you'll email me, then I'll be glad to provide you some examples of how you can take an internal audit checklist with your own internal committee and make sure you got the right checks and balances in your system. Yes?
What is your feeling on compilations we have a compilation done every year of our finances instead of a full-blown audit. We have the auditor comes in and he sits down and he goes through all of our, I was under the impression that it was a step underneath the audit versus going through a full-blown. It's less expensive and he still signs off on it and it's still legally binding with him as the one who does the audit.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to mention that. That is an interim step between doing it internally and doing a full-blown audit with his stamp on it saying, these these reports accurately reflect the financial condition of this church. It is an interim step. It's much less expensive, and they will go through, and they will give you recommendations. If they see some places where you could tighten up your controls or whatever, they'll give you recommendations, and that is a good way to do it. I want to talk very quickly about facilities management. FF&E, it just simply stands for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. You need to do an inventory of those kinds of things, primarily for the reasons that Dennis talked to us about a little earlier. Some people will do a videotape, and that's good. That's a good first step. I don't think it's quite adequate because that is a snapshot in time, pardon the pun, and your equipment and furniture will change over time. Stuff wears out, you throw it away, you go buy new computers, whatever. I think it's much better, even if you do a videotape, to have a written list. And every time you throw something away, strike it from the list. Every time you go out and buy something new, put it on the list with the amount you paid and the date you bought it, and keep it up to date. Because if you don't, this is in those 400-something pages that Dennis was talking about. This is likely what your insurance policy is going to say. In case of a loss, you must prepare a list of damaged personal property showing in detail the quantity, description, value, and amount of loss. Attach supporting documentation. The two key items there. The word you. The insurance company's not going to do it for you. They're going to look to you. And they're going to say, oh, you tell me you lost all that and it costs that amount of dollars? Show me. Show me some proof. Okay? Now, this is something I recommend to every church. I know of very few churches that do it. In your budget planning, plan for replacement reserves. What are replacement reserves? That's simply cash reserves that you build up over time to fund the replacement of equipment and furnishings that you know are going to wear out. You know your carpet's going to need to be replaced about every 5 to 7 years. Estimate what that cost is going to be 5 to 7 years from now, and every year put back 1/5 or 1/7 of the amount it's going to take. That way, when that carpet wears out, you don't have a sudden emergency and you got to take up a special offering and hope that you get enough to put the new carpet down. You know it's going to happen, plan for it. You know that roof's going to wear out in 30 years or 20 years or whatever, start planning for it. You know that furnace is going to break at some point, that hot water heater's going to go out, plan for it. Put it in your budget. Okay, and the way you calculate your replacement reserves, again, as I said, you just estimate the replacement cost, divide it by the expected life of the item, and that's the amount you want to reserve, put back every year. Okay, we talked a little bit about liability issues. Van talked about that some last night. You want to look around your church. You want it to be a beautiful place, but not only that, a safe place. So you need to look at your lighting, your signage, hidden corners where people could walk out in front of them, moving cars, steps, lawns, walkways, and so forth. Just be aware and look for potential hazards that you can create. Personnel policy manual. I'm going to talk about that quickly. Again, it's so important to put these kinds of things in writing, even if you only have 1 or 2 staff members. You know, have something in writing down there that talks about code of conduct and discipline and dismissal, sexual harassment, child molestation. By the way, I'd make it a policy. It may have already been stated, but I'll restate it. Make it a policy that everybody who is a hired member of the staff or is a volunteer that works with children or youth has a background check done. It ought to be standard policy that everybody that fits in those categories gets a background check. And they're not expensive. You can do them, I think, for $15, $20, something like that. So they're not very expensive. Job
Ron,
descriptions?
if I can interject there. You
Yes.
call my office.
Uh-huh.
My secretary has some contact information with the company that we use for our UCamp that's even a little more cost effective than that.
Okay, great. Great. You heard
We'll be
that.
glad to give that company information to you.
If you need some information on a good company to use, Rob said give his office a call and he'll help you with that. Okay, job descriptions are good because they provide an interview guide. They provide a way for both you and your staff member to understand what the duties and responsibilities are. And they help to provide accountability and effectiveness in the jobs that folks do.